This is not going to be a typical PC versus console video. No benchmarks, no spec sheets, no graphs. Just some thoughts I've been carrying around for a while, and I figured it was worth sitting down and actually talking through them properly. I've been off both sides of this. I owned consoles, I game on PC now, and I have some opinions. Not because I want to start an argument, but because I think a lot of people who are genuinely trying to figure out where to invest their money are not getting the full picture from most of these conversations online. So if you're in that position, if you're looking at your options and you're not entirely sure which direction makes more sense for you, maybe this is useful. These are just my honest thoughts laid out as clearly as I can manage. Think of it as one person's perspective shared openly. Make of it what you will. The first thing that comes up in this conversation, almost without exception, is money. PC gaming is too expensive, that's the argument. And I understand why it looks that way from the outside. You see a high-end build with a top-tier GPU and a processor that costs as much as a used car, and the conclusion seems obvious. But PC gaming has tiers just like anything else, and this is the part that is not explained properly. At the entry level, you're looking at somewhere between $700 and $1,000. Something like an RTX 4060 or an RX 7600 paired with a solid mid-range CPU. That gets you comfortable 1080p gaming at high settings with some 1440p capability depending on the title. And that price point, that's roughly where current gen consoles sit as well. The mid-range is 1200 to 2000, ultra settings at 1440p with meaningful headroom for streaming or content creation alongside gaming. That's where I personally am. And then the high-end tier, 2500 and above. That's path tracing, 4K, sustained high frame rates, all simultaneously. The point is, the entry price is not as far removed from console pricing as people tend to assume. The difference is in what you're getting for that money and how that investment behaves over time. Hardware is only part of the equation. What you spend on games over the years matter just as much, arguably more, and this is where PC starts pulling ahead in a way that I think is genuinely underestimated. On PC, you are not tied to one storefront. Steam, Epic Game Store, GOG, Humble Bundle, the Blizzard Launcher, Ubisoft Connect, all of them competing for the same audience, and where the real competition, there are real deals. Steam sales are well known at this point, 60-70% reductions on major titles. Games from 2 or 3 years ago, still excellent, still fully featured, available for a few euros or dollars. That's not a seasonal event. That's simply how the PC ecosystem operates. Epic Game Store goes further. They give games away entirely for free, permanently added to your library. And these aren't obscure titles. This past Christmas, at the end of 2025, they were distributing massive AAA games, like Hogwarts Legacy, that people had been paying full price for not long before. You claim them, they're yours indefinitely. There's also something that console players tend to accept as just part of the deal: paying a subscription to access online multiplayer. PlayStation Plus, Nintendo Switch Online both require an annual fee just to play with other people. On PC, online multiplayer is free. It always has been. You buy the game and you play it. That's the entirety of the transaction. Console storefronts do run sales, and they're not worthless. But the baseline prices are higher, the discounts are less aggressive, there's no meaningful competition between storefronts pushing prices down, and there's the additional annual cost of online access sitting on top of everything else. Accumulated over 5 years, the difference in what you spend on games and subscriptions between PC and console is substantial. The gap represents real money, money that on PC could go toward your next hardware upgrade. There's an argument I almost never hear in this debate, and I think it's one of the most honest and important ones. A console is genuinely a reasonable purchase on launch day. Modern hardware at an accessible price with the understanding that it will carry you through the several years of gaming without requiring any decisions about components or upgrades. For the first couple of years after launch, that holds true. It's fair value. But hardware doesn't pause. GPU generations move forward, architectures improve, and by the time you're 3 or 4 years into a console's lifecycle, the hardware inside that sealed the box has started falling behind. Developers are still making games for it, but they're doing so while quietly working around its limitations. Frame rates get capped, resolutions get scaled down, visual features get quietly reduced to keep performance within acceptable bounds. And your options at that point are limited. The mid-generation upgrade, the Pro version, is presented as the answer, but let's be straightforward about what you're actually paying for. The PlayStation 5 Pro launched at a price point that is significantly higher than the original console. We aren't talking about a modest upgrade fee here, it's a massive price premium. And what do you actually get for that extra money? Modest improvements in select titles, a bit better performance in some cases, sure, but nothing that most people would describe as clearly worth the step price jump. When you look at the actual performance difference versus the cost, passing on it isn't just reasonable, it's the logical choice. So the meaningful upgrade on console is essentially just waiting for the next generation, which means a new device, a new ecosystem, questions about library compatibility, safe transfers, peripheral support, effectively starting over at considerable cost. On PC, I replace one component, everything else remains exactly as it was. The library stays, the safes stay, the rest of the machine stays, and I can recover a portion of the cost by selling the part I'm replacing. Because I think there's a misconception worth addressing. The idea that keeping a PC current means effectively rebuilding it from scratch every few years. That's not the reality. When I moved from the 4060 Ti to the RTX 5070, I opened the case, removed the old card, installed the new one, and closed it again. The CPU, DRAM, the storage, the case, the monitors, the peripherals, none of it changed, because none of it needed to. The GPU was the bottleneck, so that's the only thing I addressed. And the old card, I sold it. Second-hand PC components hold reasonable value when they have been well maintained. What I got back from that sale came straight off the cost of the new card. So the actual out-of-pocket cost of upgrading was meaningfully lower than the retail price of the RTX 5070. That's not a small thing. I'm aware the same logic can be applied to consoles. Sell the old one, put the money toward the new one. That's a valid approach and plenty of people take it, but the difference is fundamental. On console, selling the old device to fund the new one means replacing everything, the entire platform. Whereas on PC, I'm replacing precisely the component that was limiting me, nothing else. The upgrade is targeted, the disruption is minimal, and the cost is softened by the resale value of the part being replaced. Over many years of gaming, that approach is considerably more economical than it appears on the surface. There's something about PC gaming I find genuinely worthwhile what doesn't get discussed enough. The fact that your existing library improves as your hardware does. A game you purchased 2 years ago on a mid-range machine ran well at the time. Upgrade your GPU and that same purchase runs differently. Higher frame rates, better detail, features that weren't practical before suddenly become accessible. No additional payment, no remaster purchase. The game you already own simply performs better because the machine running it is better. And then there's modding. Consoles offer almost nothing here in any meaningful sense. The PC modding community, by contrast, is one of the most creative and dedicated forces in gaming. Games like Cyberpunk 2077, Skyrim, Fallout, they've been fundamentally extended and transformed by community work. Graphical overhauls, new storylines, entirely new gameplay systems built on top of the original foundation. A game you already completed becomes something new entirely, often years after release. That kind of longevity simply isn't available on console. Backward compatibility is another area where PC has a quiet but significant advantage. Titles from decades ago largely run without issue on a modern PC. No subscription to a legacy catalog, no waiting for a remaster, no hoping the publisher decide it's worth re-releasing. The library is simply there, and it goes back further than any console ecosystem can reasonably offer. Something that comes up repeatedly in this debate, and honestly it's the argument I find least useful, is the side-by-side screenshot comparison. High-end PC versus PS5 Pro. Two frozen frames, and the conclusion drawn is that they look essentially the same. A single frozen frame tells you very little about the actual experience of playing a game. What it doesn't show you is frame rate. On a capable PC, you're looking at 60, 120 frames per second or higher, sustained consistently through a session. On console, the typical choice is between a 30 FPS fidelity mode or a 60 FPS performance mode, and reaching either of those targets requires trade-offs. Resolution, shadow quality, draw distance, ray tracing. Something gets reduced quietly to hit the number. The difference between 30 frames per second and 120 is not an abstract specification. It changes how a game feels to interact with. The responsiveness of input, the smoothness of movement, the general sense of fluidity. It's perceptible even to people who haven't consciously noticed it before. And it's something a screenshot comparison is structurally incapable of conveying. One more point on the PC side, and then I'll give the other side its proper due. Building a PC from scratch sounds daunting if you haven't done it, but in practice, with the resources available today, detailed guides, component compatibility tools, active communities that will answer specific questions, it's become genuinely approachable. One focused weekend is a reasonable estimate for someone starting from zero. And the value of knowing your own machine is real. When something needs upgrading or replacing, you understand exactly what you're dealing with. There's no guesswork, no dependency on manufacturer decisions made years in advance. You address what needs addressing, at a cost you've chosen. That level of control over your hardware is something a console simply cannot offer by design. I want to be straightforward here, because this wouldn't be an honest conversation if I just argued one side the entire time. Consoles have genuine advantages. The most obvious one is simplicity, and I mean that in the best way possible. You purchase the hardware, you purchase a game, you sit down and play it. No configuration, no driver management, no compatibility questions, no decisions about graphics presets or upscaling options. The experience is immediate and uncomplicated. For many people, that's precisely what they want from gaming, and it's a completely reasonable position. To be fair, consoles have become somewhat less frictionless over time. Large day one patches, firmware updates, download queues, those exist now too, but the overall experience remains meaningfully simpler than PC, and that simplicity has real value for a significant portion of the gaming audience. The more substantial advantage, though, is exclusives, and this one I'm not going to minimize. Nintendo occupies a position that's difficult to compare to anything else in the industry. The quality of their first-party output, the consistency, the creative approach, it's respected across the entire gaming community, regardless of platform preference. And Nintendo keeps all of it exclusively within their ecosystem. That is a legitimate and self-contained reason to own their hardware. There's no counter-argument that changes that fact. PlayStation has produced some of the most acclaimed single-player games of the past decade, and for approximately 6 years Sony was bringing those titles to PC. God of War, Spider-Man, Ghost of Tsushima, Horizon, The Last of Us. As a PC gamer, that was a welcome development. It felt like a sensible direction for the industry. In May 2026, that ended. PlayStation Studio CEO Herman Hulst confirmed that the Sony's first-party single-player games will no longer be ported to PC. Titles like Ghost of Yotei and Saros, which many PC players had reasonable expectations of eventually receiving, will remain PlayStation exclusives going forward. The reasoning given is related to protecting console hardware sales and platform identity. Personally, I find that disappointing, not purely as a PC gamer, but because I think a great games reaching a wider audience is straightforwardly good for the medium. The business rationale is understandable. The outcome for players is less welcome. But it is the current reality, and it goes strengthen the case for PlayStation hardware in a way that wasn't quite as true a year ago. Xbox has taken a fundamentally different approach. Microsoft has been deliberately working to unify Xbox and PC gaming into a single ecosystem. Game Pass available on PC, first-party titles releasing on both platforms simultaneously. For a PC gamer, that means access to the same Xbox library without owning the console. I think it's the right direction, and it reflects a more open philosophy about how gaming ecosystems should work. So, consoles for specific exclusive experiences, for simplicity, for the particular comfort of the living room setup. Those are real advantages and they belong in this conversation. So that's where I come out on this. It's not a war, and it was never really a war. It's a question of what you actually want from gaming, and what you're willing to invest in money, in time, in engagement with the hardware itself. If what you want is simplicity, a guaranteed couch experience, and access to exclusive titles you genuinely can't get anywhere else, particularly Nintendo's output, then a console is a defensible and in some cases clearly correct choice. If you want something that grows with you over time, that gives you control over your own experience, that offers better long-term value across hardware and software, and that lets you see what games are actually capable of at their ceiling, then PC is probably where you end up, and it's probably more accessible to get there than you assume. Most people who are serious about gaming over the long term eventually find themselves with both. A PC at the desk and a console in the living room, each serving a different purpose. That's not a contradiction, it's just acknowledging that both have place. But in the conversation about graphical performance and long-term value, the one that generates the most noise online, the honest answer is that PC holds the advantage, and that advantage grows rather than shrinks as console generation age. Those are my thoughts. It's a complicated landscape, and there really isn't a single right answer anymore. It all comes down to what you value more, the straightforward simplicity of a console or the long-term freedom and flexibility of a PC. But I'm genuinely curious to hear about your experience. If you recently made the switch from console to PC, or if you looked at the hardware market and decided to stick with your PlayStation or Xbox, what was the deciding factor for you? Let me know in the comments. I read through them and I think that's where the real value of these videos comes from, sharing those different perspectives. If you found this breakdown helpful, or if it gave you a bit of clarity for your own setup, consider subscribing to the channel. It lets me know this kind of content is worth making. Thank you for watching. Take care and I'll see you in the next one.